not, you come visit me over at the clinic later today. I hope that what I speak on gives you a few things to just think about and consider. Whether it's your personal situation to pass on to some information to pass on to your children or other loved ones. Like I said, I'm Jennifer Thomas. I've got my own firm up in Ponte Vedra and come down to the St. Augustine area frequently. So I grew up in this area. And estate planning and community hospice are particularly close to my heart. And I actually brought my Bible up with me this morning because my father passed away when I was younger, my senior year in high school. And that's really what drove me to do what I do. I actually have my visitor sticker from community hospice right up here. So this 15-year-old Bible that probably needs to be replaced, I just can't do it because this holds a big piece of my heart. So this topic is so important to me because of the experience that I had with my family. It was a good one, fortunately. And I see too often when someone passes away that they don't leave their family and as good of a situation as my father left me. So a lot of people say, what is estate planning? It's just this word that's thrown around out there. And really, estate planning is a blueprint for the legacy you want to leave for your family and a blueprint for how you want your care to be managed financially and medically if you ever become incapacitated for whatever reason, whether it's temporary, like a car accident, or something a little bit more permanent, like Alzheimer's or dementia or terminal illness. So often I hear some kind of myths about estate planning, and it's that I don't need to do estate planning because I don't have a whole lot of assets. I'm not a millionaire. And whether you've got $5 or $500,000 or $5 million, really, estate plan covers so much more than just where your money is going to go, that it is still an essential thing for everyone. The other big myth is, I'm young, I don't need estate planning, I can worry about that when I'm older. And as we all know, things can turn on a dime. We don't know what tomorrow has in store, and so it is never too soon to start your estate planning. Another myth is, there's LegalZoom out there. I can do this myself. And it's a lot less expensive, and it's something I can do on my own time. But the big problem there is that LegalZoom isn't going to get to know you. It's not going to get to know your family and your wishes and be able to help guide you through some of the tough conversations or tough obstacles that might be in store for your family and really help you put together a very thoughtful plan. And the last big myth that I hear so frequently and so unfortunately is that I don't need to think about my estate plan. My whole family gets along. And that is so great. And we hope that families remain happy and harmonious. But unfortunately, things happen. And families don't always get along after somebody passes away, especially if there's money involved. And so putting a plan into place to help keep your family peaceful, harmonious, and make that tough transition more smooth is one of the greatest gifts you can give your family. A lot of times I hear, I don't need to do some estate planning. I'll just put my kids on my bank account, and I'll have joint accounts or beneficiary designations. And this is a real story. Names changed that I dealt with, and dollar amounts changed. But a couple years ago, I was meeting with an elderly lady, and she came in because she wanted to do some advanced directives. She didn't want to think about her will. She said, I've got it all under control. I've got my kids on my bank accounts, and they'll just take care of it. So we'll call her Carol and her 3 daughters, Marcia, Jan, and Cindy. And let's just say that Carol had about $90,000 in retirement and CDs and bank accounts, checking, savings, and accounts all over town. Now, Marcia lived in town close to Carol. Jan lived in Atlanta, So she was here visiting frequently, and Cindy, the youngest one, she had gone off to California. So Marcia helped her mom most frequently with managing her assets. So Marcia was listed as a joint owner on several of Carol's accounts, about $50,000 worth of accounts. Jan came down a couple times a year, and she would go to the bank and help her mom with a few things here and there. And she was on accounts totaling about $30,000. And Cindy came in like once a year, but she would stay for a week or two, and so she would take her mom and do whatever they needed to do while she was in town, and she was on accounts for about $10,000. So I'm talking to Carol, and we're talking about, well, how do you want your assets to be divided between your daughters if something were to happen to you? And she said, well, equally, of course. We look at all of the accounts, and I say, Carol, you see, if something had happened to you yesterday with the way everything is, Marcia would have gotten $50,000, Jan would have gotten $30,000, and Cindy would have gotten $10,000, and that's nothing close to what your wishes are. And so we really talked through how to title her accounts and get some documents in place to make sure that her wishes happened, and that there was going to be no conflict between her daughters if something did happen. Because I'm sure, as you can imagine, after someone's passed away and you've come into that money, it would be not far off for those three daughters to get into some type of disagreement. They might not pool that money together and divide it equally like their mother wished. So fortunately, we were able to get that situation straightened out. But just as easily, I've seen situations like that happen where planning wasn't in place and planning wasn't done. I think the other big thing to talk about is intestacy laws in the state of Florida. And intestacy laws are it's the laws in place that govern where things go if you don't have a will. So it's a very legally word, but it's where things go when you don't have a will. And I think most people assume if you're married and you've got kids, that the law's going to say everything goes to my surviving spouse, and if something happened to both of us, it would just go to our kids equally. And that's true sometimes. It's true in the situation where you've got a first marriage and you've got both kids are from that marriage. But how many of you guys know blended families? I mean, everyone knows of a blended family. That's just the way that the world is now. And in that situation, if somebody dies with a spouse and children from a prior marriage, that surviving spouse gets 50%, and those children from that first marriage get 50%. And that might not be what those individuals want. Those children might be very young. That surviving spouse might be the only parent they've ever known, and they have full intentions to continue caring for that child or those children. Maybe not. Maybe they're adults, and it's not a big deal if the cash is divided that way. But what about home ownership? Do you really want your adult children owning 50% of a home with your surviving spouse? They want to go sell it. They have to get everyone, all of those kids, to agree. So it can create a very tricky, complicated situation and expensive situation in the probate process, which the probate process is what we do with the courts after somebody has passed away. So a lot of these things can be identified and planned for with some simple estate planning to really avoid a lot of these problems and challenges for families after the fact. The kind of last thing is that flows right into is the DIY estate planning. Joint accounts, legal Zoom wills, just relying on beneficiary designations. That will get you through to a certain point, but often I've never seen a DIY will, even a DIY will done by very intelligent financial advisors or attorneys who practice criminal law successfully create advanced documents and wills that actually communicate their wishes effectively. Those mistakes are often expensive to fix. They weren't taken through thoughtful conversations to address all of the what-ifs in life. And they just didn't have a compassionate, caring person guiding them through that process. So that's kind of my quick summary of things to think about when it comes to estate planning. And I'm certainly happy to talk to anyone during the clinic about the questions or things that I've given you to think about. So thank you guys again for having me.
Yeah, you may think that, well, Pastor, I'm a young person. I'm in my, maybe some of you here are in your 20s. Some of you may be in your 30s. Others may be, getting up there in age. I said getting. I didn't say you were up there already. I'm saying getting up there. What was that? I know. See, I don't want to get myself in trouble first thing on a Sunday morning. This is important for all of us. The Bible is very clear concerning us having our house in order. If you have your Bibles, open up to the book of 2 Kings, chapter 20. And this has been our theme verse for the since last week when we started the series on bucket lists. That's what we've been talking about, bucket lists. And we've been talking about things that we need to get on our list as we think about this life, as we think about the fragility of this life, the fact that this life is it's a vapor. It's here one moment, we're here one moment, and we're gone the next. And we see this in the story of Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 1. So this is what it says. In those days Hezekiah was sick and near death, and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, went to him and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die, and you will not live." I mean, that's just plain out there. You will die. And for this particular circumstance, we know that he was actually afflicted with something. He was afflicted with a sickness, and his death was impending. It was near. He actually knew that it was close. And for some of us, we know that. For us others, we think we still have our whole lives ahead of us. And then he goes on to say this. He says, then he turned his face towards the wall and he prayed to the Lord, saying, "Remember now, O Lord, I pray how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart and have done what was good in your sight." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. And it happened before Isaiah had gone out into the middle of the court that the word of the Lord came to him. And then the Lord actually gave him the cure. He told him to boil a pot of water, a stew, and to put in there a fig branch. And when he put that fig branch in there, that it provided something, some sort of nourishment. There was something in that fig branch that cured that ailment that he was going through. But the reality is that, we don't have a cure-all for our sin sickness. We don't have a cure-all for the fact that we're going to die. I wish we found the fountain of youth. Well, we found the fountain of youth, but it doesn't work. I've drank that water, and it's pretty nasty. It's a sulfur-ridden water, right? It's not really it's not going to keep us alive forever. So the reality is that we all know that one day we will die. That's the reality. Now, I'm not trying to be morbid in this, because the reality is that with that in mind, with that frame set of thinking in mind, then what do we do? How do we live our life to its fullest potential with the moments that have been given to us, with this life that has been breathed to us? And then how do we then take that and then live a life that is one in which we're leaving a legacy, something that we're leaving for our children? Listen, I put this on Facebook last night. Some of you may have seen it or not. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. And it says this. It says, "By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than his brother Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, and God commending him by accepting his gifts. So God commended him because he was, in his heart, he was right. He lived his life rightly. He discerned the voice of God for his life. And then it says this, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. Though he died, he still speaks. Through his faith, through this life that he lived, this faith-filled life, this relationship that he had with a living Savior, his life still speaks even to this day. So I want to ask you then, I want to propose this question to you. How do you plan on letting your life still speak when you're gone? And is it important for us to allow for our legacy, for our life to continue to speak once we're gone? The answer to that is a resounding absolute yes. Listen, our faith, the way that we live this life, the calling that God has placed on our hearts and on our lives is one in which it is a perpetual voice to the generations to come. I love reading history, and you guys know I'd like to tout a lot of historical people in the past who have living legacy, living heirs today, who are doing things based on the foundation that was set by their those who had come before them many years before. I think of Jonathan Edwards, and Jonathan Edwards' great-grandson became a Supreme Court judge, and there were those who followed on who are making impacts even to this very day. And so there's something to be said about the way that we live our life today, and then how we plan this life, so that when we're gone, that our voices from today continue to speak even into the days that are ahead. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21 says this, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. Where your treasure is," what does it say? "There your heart will be also." Now I want you to think about this for just a moment. Now he's saying here, lay not for yourselves treasures on earth, lay them up in heaven. What treasures is he talking about? What is this interaction that Jesus is really bringing down here? Now, if you continue to read this, he goes on to say that you can't serve both God and you can't serve mammon or the spirit of money. There's an underlying spirit within money. Now money itself is not bad. He's not saying that you shouldn't have money. As a matter of fact, we need money to conduct business, to live the life, to carry on, to be able to do what we need to do. We need money. The problem is where our affections lie. Where do our affections lie? What is the purpose of what we're doing with what God has given to us? Because what we're called to is stewardship. What we're called to is stewardship. As a matter of fact, there are verses in Scripture that call us, listen to this, he calls us oikonomos. Oikonomos. Now that word oikonomos, the steward, in the Greek, it means this. Oikon is where we get the word economy. Oikonomos, nomos is the person. So the person who deals with the economy, the buying and the selling, the trading of goods, it is the person who is constantly interacting. And God has called us to be people who understand what it means to buy and sell, to know what it means to handle the affairs that he has entrusted to us. We're called to be stewards, people who are wise with what God has entrusted to us. What has God entrusted to us? Well, look around. God has entrusted each of us to each other. God has entrusted your resources to you. God has entrusted your children to you. God has entrusted much to you. Now, how are you being wise with that? How are you dealing with those things? How are you planning and preparing for those things? I think about last year. Those of you who know Pastor John last year, he retired a couple years ago, right? About 5 years ago from ministry. All right. So even more. All right. So 20-something years of ministry, and you thought you had a good plan in place, right?
I thought so. Yeah.
He thought so. And now y'all remember, they're retired. They're doing what retired people do, right? Which is take a cruise. Am I right?
That's right. We love to take a cruise and really look forward to one.
So he's in the cruise. He winds up getting sick, and then eventually you pass out in a group of people, and they wind up having to they get a helicopter and life flight you out, right? They take him to the port, and then from the port they life flight you to the hospital. Tell me what happens next.
Things weren't looking up.
Did you have anything in place? Did you have any paperwork that Phyllis could say, okay, this is what his wishes are?
No, that's the problem.
Over 30 years of ministry, and you've helped a lot of people through the end stages of life, and yet...
I'd go to the hospital or someplace, say, to get a test done, and they'd say, do you have advanced directive? No. No big deal. No. And I would just answer no, and I really didn't give it a second thought. Here we hadn't changed our will since we had moved to Florida, and plus it had been probably 20 years since we had even looked at it.
Yeah.
It was time, and we now have advanced directives, and we have updated our wills. Take it seriously. I got a second chance.
Absolutely. Well, aren't we so thankful for John? Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. This is the reality here. This is the reality is that we're all entrusted with these opportunities to engage in these type of conversations now. This is the opportunity now that you have right here. Every one of you is in your right mind, that I believe. I can't attest that for everybody. And some of you are questioning whether or not I'm in my right mind, but that's okay. The reality is that we've been given something, right? We've been given something, and then how we handle that is important. We've been given opportunities to make decisions, you know. How many who here has some money that I want to show? Anybody here have some cash? Yeah, come on. Man, Kevin, you're awesome, man. Thanks. Go ahead. I have a seat. I'm gonna. Man, $40? This is awesome. All right. So I don't have any money on me. That's why I'm asking other people for money. So every one of us has been given something in this economy, in this economy. You know, we've been entrusted something, whether it's 220s, whether it's, you might have $100,000 in a bank. You might have some retirement. You might have some. You might just have a nice doll collection, and I don't know what it is for you that holds some sort of importance in your life, but you've been entrusted with that, and so we have this. How we handle this is so important, and so how I'm going to handle this, I'll let you know later. I'll give you a report later. But how we handle what we've been given is important, because we are to make the hard decisions. We're here to look forward, to be forward-looking. We're constantly called to have vision for something. Without vision, the people perish. Without a plan in place, without looking forward, you can never accomplish what God truly wants you to accomplish. Listen, even Jesus thought it was so important for his disciples to understand that he actually, before he dies, he shifts his ministry. Luke chapter 11, Jesus is going out and he's preaching to masses. And he's preaching to lots and lots of people. Hundreds of people are getting saved. Hundreds of people are getting healed. It's just this mass movement of bringing people into a relationship with him. In Luke chapter 11, this whole scenario shifts. And Luke chapter 12, it says this. It says that Jesus speaks specifically to his disciples. So now his conversation moves from one of bringing the salvation message to the masses to now tidying up his affairs. You'll read that. Read that in Luke chapter 12. And it says that he speaks to his disciples, and then the crowds are still kind of going around, and they're all around him still, but he's addressing his disciples. And this is what it says in verse 17. One of the people that are in the crowd call out, and he says, "Hey, my brother has not given me my portion of my inheritance." And so Jesus gives this parable of the servant. Now we talked about this about 3 weeks ago. We're talking about the heart issues, dealing with greed in our hearts and understanding that God has entrusted us with something. And so we're supposed to be wise and be diligent stewards in giving, being generous. Dealing with greed is about dealing with our generosity, the spirit of generosity. But look at what it says in verse 17. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? This is that guy who has this increase. He has an increase of all of this, all of his grain. Production is like, man. And now he's thinking like an entrepreneur, and he says, and he's thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store these increasing crops? And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, I will say to myself, I will say, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? It was given to me. It's mine. When I die, these $40 will be in my pocket. You hear me? No. Then I go around and I look, who has need? I say, I know who has need, because we have community here, and so we see, hey, there are those of us here who are in need. There's somebody here, you're struggling, and I want to bless you. You won't give it back. You know why? Because I gave him that $40 before service started. And then he gave it back. God gives to us. And then we give it back. And when we give it back, he gives it. Listen, you see, here's the problem that many of us, we say, well, Pastor, you gave him the $40. It was his. And then I needed it. I needed it because I knew there was a need. And so I asked it back. And he willingly gave, thank you for willingly giving it back. I didn't know how that was going to turn out, but man, because I love you. You see, he says, fool, you've prepared this, but you didn't know who gave it to you. And so you made preparations that were outside of my purpose and my will. And it was all about you. So when we prepare, is it really all about us, or is it about who God has commissioned us to take care of? How do we plan? How are we purposeful with the things that God has given to us while we are still breathing in this life? See, God has given all of us an estate. Here's the problem that many of us, we think we have a mentality of lack. And so when we hear the word estate and you hear the word estate planning, you think, oh, that's for somebody who has tons of money. That's somebody who has 40 acres out there. And they have money. No. Every one of you has an estate. This is the definition of estate. An estate refers to everything of value that an individual owns. Whether it's real estate, whether it's art, it may be an antique desk. It might be your investment. It may be your retirement funds. It might be an insurance policy. Any asset or entitlement that you have is your estate. And every one of you has been called to be faithful stewards of the estate that God has given you to be a steward of. So we've got to change our thinking. Now we've got to think, what would Jesus do? How would Jesus do? How would he direct me to do this? Listen, Jordan Ortberg writes this. He writes growing up with his grandmother, who was a ruthless competitor at Monopoly. She played against her children and won nearly every single game. But one day, young John managed to win. As most kids will do, he made the most of his rare victory. He raked up all the play money, all the tokens, all the markers towards himself, and he gloated arrogantly in triumph. The grandmother smiled and said, "Just remember, John, it all goes back in the box. All of the money, all of the hotels, all of your motels, all of your game tokens, at the end of the game, it all goes back in the box." We have but limited control. So what we're called to be is faithful then. Since I can't control this, I can't take it with me, I'm called to be faithful. Now the Bible gives a few scriptures concerning how then we are to think about what we're going to leave our heirs. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. The Bible says that we're to provide for our children and our children's children. So how we think about this thing, then it matters. Because if you're going to leave a legacy for your children and your children's children, then you need to make sure that you're doing it the right way. And how do I do that the right way? Well, the laws are different in every state, so get yourself an attorney. That's probably the best way to deal with it. But you need to know what you're doing, and you have to do it the correct way. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 21, an inheritance gained hastily in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. In other words, if you give everything up front to somebody, when you die, guess what? They will probably waste it. And that's why there are things in place such as trust, especially if you're giving them to children. Then you can have trust in which children are defined, and you have a person who is in charge of making sure the children get what they need to be able to stretch out that dollar amount to cover them until they go into an adulthood. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 11. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and an advantage to those who see the sun. In other words, when you are preparing this, seek out wisdom. DIY doesn't always work, and it's not the best way to do it. Seek wisdom. Galatians 4, 1 and 2. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his fathers. Listen, you say, well, all those other ones were Old Testament. Listen, even the New Testament addresses this fact, that there should be something in place to take care of your children and your children's children, especially for those of us I can say who have kids with special needs. We need to make sure that they're taken care of. And this is something that is scriptural that we must do. The approach that we take is everything. Center on the issues that need to be addressed. Rather than looking at paperwork that needs to be filled out, look at the issues that need to be addressed. Once those decisions are made, the legal documents necessary to accomplish your objectives start falling into place because you know what you are trying to accomplish. What are the important issues to address in an estate plan then, when we talk about wills and advance directives? Basically, they are the who, the what, and the how of transitioning your responsibilities. I want to say that again. Of transitioning your responsibilities. Why? Because you're a steward. And now you are transitioning your responsibilities when you can no longer perform them because of disability or death. You need to appoint, empower, and instruct those individuals and professionals that you trust to carry out your responsibilities. This is important for people at all stages of life. Whether you're young in your 20s, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You can leave here and get caught up in an accident and leaves you in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. How do you want to be taken care of? You need to deal with this. These are things that need to be dealt with. And you need to start delegating those responsibilities of how you are going to have that taken care of, and then who you are going to appoint, empower, and instruct to be able to help you carry out those things. We've been talking about this. Last week we said the first and foremost importance is that we get our spiritual house in order. Because we're not guaranteed tomorrow. But one thing we are guaranteed is this: we will either choose life or choose death. We're either going to heaven or we're going to hell. I mean, there is no in between there. But the thing is that it's a choice. And today you can choose to get your house in order financially. Today you can choose to get your house in order spiritually. Today you can choose to get your house in order in every facet of your life. But the opportunity is yours to take. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 2, and I'm going to close with this. It says, "Behold, now is the accepted time." Now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of your salvation. This is the opportunity for you to get everything in order. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. You're not guaranteed at 1 o'clock this afternoon. I want to tell you, you're not guaranteed anything. Now is the time for you to get everything straight. I know that today's message was much more practical than it was the spiritual elements of pulling you into a place where God would deal with your heart. I want God to deal also with your mind, for you to get everything in place. It's important and it's imperative that we have the right frame set of mind in dealing with our everyday affairs.